Hi, I'm Noel, and I'm a solo game developer working on an adventure game set across two worlds. In one world, it's grounded in reality, where the player is a child collecting toys and setting up games in their room, while the other is a world of imagination, where the child's toys come to life and the player steps into that world, experiencing how the child's choices shape the world around them. 6 months ago, I left my job at a large company to pursue a dream that I've had for several years, making a game of my own. And the first few months were all about exploring different ideas. I prototyped a bunch of different concepts, such as a third-person RTS with some survival mechanics, a cozy RPG set in a coffee shop, and even a multiplayer Christmas-themed arena battler where the players fought to become the ultimate Santa. It was a chaotic mix, but it helped me find the concept I really wanted to build. In this game, you play as a child whose world is transformed by the magic of toys, and each toy you collect expands your gameplay and opens up a new part of the imaginary world, turning you into a character inside of this toy-inspired realm. As your collection grows, so do the mechanics and the systems that you get to explore. I've been working on this game for about a month now, and progress has been good, but I know this is going to take me several years to finish building. I'm estimating for about 2, but we'll see how that goes. Now, I wanted to begin with something foundational, the building mechanics. I've always loved games that give players the freedom to customize their worlds. Games like Minecraft, Don't Starve, and Ark are games that I've played a lot of, and I think they do this really well. That being said, I wanted to take a slightly different direction when it came to my game. Rather than blending the build mode directly into gameplay, I decided to make a dedicated mode. And since the game explores a child's imagination and their creativity, it felt fitting that I would focus on this game mode first and make sure that the player had their setup space to build their world. Growing up, I spent a lot of time building LEGO worlds with my brother and friends, and this system is in a way a nod to those moments. To start, I built out some basic block meshes. Simple shapes with little rivets to give them a toy-like feel. And the key here wasn't really the visuals, but just making sure that everything snapped cleanly to a grid. Once this was done, I brought those assets into Unreal and built the first version of the player controller. I used a system inspired by Unreal's own editor, allowing players to orbit around the build and rotate the view using the right mouse button. They can even increase or decrease the sensitivity using the scroll wheel, which should allow them for either more precise or more large movements as needed. This overall was a pretty easy process and went very smoothly, and once it felt right, I turned my attention to the more complicated part, the build area and the placer system. The build area itself is a dynamic mesh with custom collision used to determine whether the player is hovering over a valid space or not. This part is very straightforward, but the placer, unfortunately, that's where things got pretty complicated. I wanted players to be able to choose any block, place it onto the build area, and then move, rotate, or resize it, all while keeping everything aligned to the grid. And since the structures that players build will appear in the main game world later, I also had to be mindful of performance. To keep things efficient, I used instance static meshes. For anyone who's unfamiliar, this means that instead of creating a new actor or component for every placed block, the game reuses a single mesh and just renders multiple instances of it. This cuts down on the draw calls, which is a great way to save on performance. The issue I kept running into was aligning the placer's local axis to the world axis while keeping all of the instances perfectly aligned to the grid. Because the instance meshes move independently of their component's pivot, I end up with a floating pivot that could drift pretty much anywhere on the map. After a bit of pain and a lot of trial and error, I pivoted to a new approach, using a single box mesh to manage the movement, expansion, and rotation, while having the instances populate the bounds of that box afterwards. This meant that I didn't need to track each instance individually anymore, just the box, which is a much simpler and far more reliable solution. Around this time, I also dove deeper into C++. Since leaving my last job, I spent a few months teaching myself the basics, and while I'm still learning, I can usually stumble my way through. Now, this system required a fair bit of math and repetition, so I decided to move the box logic into a C++ class, and then I handled the mesh rendering and blueprints. This was something I'd hoped that would be pretty easy, but unfortunately ended up taking a lot more time than I expected. But after about 400 lines of code and some stubborn debugging, the placer finally worked the way I wanted to. With the core logic in place, I added a simple material to the build area to better visualize the grid, and also made sure that the placer could auto-resize based upon the mesh it was handling. This made it a lot easier to support a wide variety of assets later on. I also built the basic UI so that the player could choose a block, place multiple items, and even change the materials. These are all things I'll keep expanding on as I continue developing. With most of the system functional, I now was able to start moving on to content. Thankfully, I had made it a goal to make the system as plug and play as possible, and that made it a lot easier for me to import new assets once they were done. In the final week of the month, I created the first themed set of assets, inspired by a Victorian house that ties into the planned quest lines. I even set up a small scene just for capturing clean screenshots of the new meshes and materials so I could use them in the UI. And that brings us to now. The build system has some rough edges, and I have a long list of features I want to add, but I'm really happy with where it's at. The nice thing about this setup is I can now use it to create the structures and props that will appear throughout the game, and while I'm still experimenting with the visual direction and style, it's already starting to feel like something pretty cohesive. And that's about it. The game's still very early, and I don't even have a name for it, but I do expect that they'll come pretty soon. In the next devlog, I'm planning to explore some visual styling, share a bit more content, and talk more about other game modes beyond building. If this project interests you, I'd love to hear your thoughts, especially if you have a favorite childhood toy you think should be in the game. Leave a comment, and it very well might end up in the game. Thank you for watching.